Since snow flurried across the Vltava Valley the morning the winter market opened in Hradisti, dusting the slate roofs and frosting the spires of the Baroque town like sugared gingerbread. Milada Valarkawa, keeper of the bells in the clock tower of St. Michael, the navigator, tugged her woolen scarf higher as she climbed the spiral stairs that ran like an auger through the tower's stone heart. The brass bell ropes waited above, stiff with cold, each one tied to a tongue of bronze that had called the hours since the days of the emperors. When she reached the ringing chamber, she warmed her gloved hands over the little iron stove, then opened the shutters so the frozen air and far-off aromas of mulled wine and roasting chestnuts could swirl in. Below, on the square, canvas stalls formed crooked streets of color, crimson for the candlemaker, cobalt for the potter, honey gold for the beekeeper whose mead steamed in silver pitchers. Milada liked the hush that hung over the market during the half hour before the first bell. Shopkeepers were still lighting lamps, merchants were clearing tracks through the powdery snow, and the town seemed to breathe in, steadying itself before the day began. She pulled the rope of Saint Roselli, the smallest bell. A single peal rose out across the rooftops, simple and clean. Then she began the proper sequence, 4 great strokes of Saint Ludmilla to announce 8 o'clock, a ripple of the tenor bells to welcome the vendors, and finally the deep cantus of Saint Michael, which vibrated in her sternum like a second heartbeat. The bells left her wrists tingling. She closed her eyes a moment, savoring the lush after echo that always reminded her of whispered promises. Down below, a tall stranger paused mid-stride in front of the marionette maker's stall. He stood very still, as if the bells had pinned him to the cobbles. He was wrapped in a travel-worn greatcoat and carried a cylindrical map case strapped across his back like a quiver. Snow settled on the brim of his felt hat. When the last tone faded, he exhaled one soft cloud and pressed his palm to his chest, bewildered. Milada watched him a moment longer, curiosity pricking beneath her ribs. Visitors came from Prague or Brno every December, lured by Hradist's reputation for music boxes and paper nativity scenes. But something in the stranger's stillness felt different, less like admiration than recognition. She let the shutters fall and turned to her logbook. There were pages yet to fill: the weather, the state of each bell's clapper, any oddities in echo or resonance. But the vision of the motionless stranger stayed glued to her mind, so that the ink blurred under her pen. That afternoon, after her shift, she descended into the market to buy bread and cheese. Lamplight glimmered on icicles that hung from stall roofs. The scent of cinnamon rose through the dusk. When she stopped beside the beekeeper's cauldron to warm her hands, a voice at her shoulder said, "Forgive me, do you ring the bells?" The stranger removed his hat, revealing hair black as burned sugar, and winter-pale eyes framed by laugh lines too gentle for the season. Up close, he looked younger than she'd thought, perhaps 30. Though wariness sagged his posture. "I do," Milada answered. "Milada Valkova, town bell ringer and caretaker of St. Michael's Tower." He bowed slightly. "Elias van Loom, I arrived by riverboat this morning. Your bells." He hesitated, searching for a word. They revealed a cartography I did not expect. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you a musician?" "A cartographer," he said, touching the map case over his shoulder. "But I chart things other maps neglect. People call me a dream cartographer." Milada had heard of them in folk tales. Travelers who claimed to map the hidden terrain of sleep and desire, plotting labyrinths of hope the way others traced ridgelines and harbors. She had assumed the story's exaggerations, yet Elias spoke with a plainness that made boasting impossible. "I felt lines of light," he went on quietly, "threads that flared over every stall. Each bell stroke turned those threads, weaving them briefly into a pattern, a tapestry of futures the townsfolk are still choosing. I have never witnessed such clarity except in the cathedrals of Andalusia at Easter, or once on the salt flats under a Chilean moon. Tell me, has anyone else reported visions after your ringing?" Milada shook her head. goose flesh rippling up her arms. You're the first to mention any. Then the chiming is tuned for certain ears. He studied her with sudden intensity. Would you permit me to climb the tower tomorrow? I would like to test a theory. She hesitated. The tower was sacred ground to her and off limits to tourists except during summer heritage tours. But something in Elias's request felt like a hinge the world meant her to open. Come at 7:15, she said, before the first bell. Wear boots. The next morning dawned crystalline, the sky a hard blue shell cracked only by church spires. Elias arrived on time, snow creaking under his soles. Milada guided him up the narrow stairs. He touched the walls with reverence, as if reading the stone's pulse. In the ringing chamber he unpacked his tools, sticks of chalk in surprising colors, sheets of vellum, and a device like a sextant married to a kaleidoscope. Explain, she asked, partly teasing. That, he said, indicating the instrument, measures convergence where one hope intersects another. The chalk is for sketching. The vellum is for the map I intend to make if the bells cooperate. And if they don't? Elias smiled. Then I shall enjoy a high balcony view and a new friend's company. Milada felt warmth bloom on her cheeks and busied herself with the stove. We ring at 8. When the hour arrived, she wrapped her gloved hands around St. Ludmilla's rope and nodded once to Elias. She pulled. The bell boomed, sonorous and wide as sunrise. The timbre thrummed through the chamber floor, lifting dust motes into slow spirals. Elias' pupils dilated. He gasped softly as though the bell had struck him in the lungs. Milada released, pulled again, 3 more times to complete the hour. Then she moved to the other ropes, producing the customary cascade that welcomed the town awake. Elias meanwhile pivoted in a slow circle, eyes unfocused. After the final note faded, he collapsed onto a stool, pressing fists to his temples. Are you all right? She asked, alarmed. I'm magnificent, he breathed. Your bells turn the air transparent. I can see the warp and weft of possibility, each filament colored by a citizen's longing. It's like peering down from a mountain at rivers that are also roads, that are also pulses. I could spend a lifetime mapping a single peal. Show me. His hands were already busy with chalk. On the flagstone floor, he sketched circles that overlapped like ripples. Within each, he wove lines, some straight, others braided, notating with sigils Milada couldn't decipher. Colors bloomed under his fingers. Turquoise, vermilion, silver white. This, he said, tapping a spiral, is the beekeeper. She wants her granddaughter to take over the hives rather than leave for university in Olomouc. The desire is strong, but fear frays it. That severed thread? Doubt from the girl herself. And that scarlet line? Milada pointed to a bold stroke that arced across half the drawing. Collective hope, Elias whispered. A yearning shared by so many that it becomes a river. Here it speaks of renewal, a wish that Hradist not become just another museum town where youth vanish and only visitors spend money. The bell's harmonic gathered those private rivulets into a single current. Magnificent, yes, but incomplete. The current needs a basin or it floods. Milada stared, feeling overwhelmed yet compelled. Could your mapping help? She asked. Cartography is only a mirror, but sometimes, if you show people the shape of their yearnings, they understand how to steer them. He lifted his gaze to her. For that, I need more data, more chimes. The next 5 days became a ritual unlike any Milada had known. Elias arrived before dawn each morning, carrying new vellum, herding his colors like an alchemist of pigments. She rang the hours as usual, but between official sequences they experimented. Single strokes struck at odd minutes, antiphonal patterns that paired large bell with small, even whispered finger taps on mute clappers that produced vibrations too faint for ordinary ears. After each sounding, Elias would sketch furiously, recording the lattice of glimmering possibilities visible only to him. Milada sometimes rang with her eyes closed, following Elias's shouted instructions. Hold the C note 16 heartbeats, or now a cascade downward minor third. Though she had no formal musical training, decades of tending the bells meant she understood their intervals the way a shepherd knows his hills. Soon she could feel when a sequence locked into some secret geography. The air tightened, the bell's overtones braided into ropes that tugged at her ribs, and Elias's breath hitched with delight. Between experiments, they descended to the market, hungry and exhilarated. Vendors grew accustomed to seeing them appear arm in arm, cheeks rosy from the tower's thin air. The candle maker passed them samples of beeswax tapers. The potter gave them cups of thick hot chocolate so dark it looked like lacquer. Once the marionette maker gifted Milada a tiny bell ringer puppet oak body, copper bells for sandals. She laughed and hung it from her belt. But not every moment was bright. Late one night, after townsfolk had shuttered their stalls, Milada found Elias still in the chamber, hunched over parchment. An unlit lantern cast shadows across his face. "How can cartography wound the cartographer?" she asked softly. He rubbed his eyes. "Patterns require threads of both hope and despair. Tonight I traced a skein of dread so black it drank my chalk. There's a man in town, Karol Messiek, owner of the old shoe factory. He fears bankruptcy. He hides it behind boasts of expansion, but inside he's already trudging through the ruins. His dread runs like tar across other people's dreams, contaminating them. Unless it's healed, the collective current may choke. Can your maps heal it? Only knowledge can. He must confront the dread and choose differently. Maps may guide, but footsteps are mortal." Milada shivered in the unheated air. She pictured Karel pacing his office, counting debts, convincing himself no rescue existed. She had never considered how one person's private terror could sicken the town. "Is there a way the bells could help?" she asked. "Ritz, they stitch dream to waking. If we orchestrate a peal that invites shared witness, the townspeople might glimpse each other's hopes simultaneously and understand how interwoven they already are. It could dilute Carol's dread, turn it from poison into caution. But we'd need everyone listening, and you." He trailed off. "I would. You would bear the strain. Each bell stroke passes through your body before it reaches the bronze, serving as conduit for a whole town's visions. Will tax you dearly." Milada squared her shoulders. "Saint Michael entrusted me with his voice. If the voice can heal, I'll lend it." Silence settled. Snow hissed against the shutters. Elias touched her hand. "Then we prepare." They chose the eve of the Three Kings, when the market would host the final procession. Children dressed as Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar carried paper stars. Choirs sang carols in minor key, and townsfolk gathered before returning to ordinary life. That night, every resident would be within earshot of the tower. The day arrived pearled with fog. Milada climbed early, stretching her arms, massaging her palms with camphor salve. Down below, Elias set up mirrors by the nativity scene, each backed with polished tin to catch the faintest flicker of light. He instructed volunteers to angle them once the bells commenced, so that any visible threads might reflect through the mist, turning the square into an unwalled cathedral of possibility. At 10 minutes to midnight, Elias joined Milada above, breath clouding. He placed a thin copper ring, etched with compass roses, into her palm. "For focus," he said. "It grounds attention the way a sextant grounds astronomy. Wear it on whichever finger feels true." She slid it onto her index finger and felt the metal warm instantly, as if remembering long sunlight. "How will I know the right sequence?" "You won't," he admitted. "But the bells will." Trust them. Trust yourself. Outside, the choir's final notes drifted away, leaving an expectant hush. Milada closed her eyes, inhaled the tower's twin scents of iron and incense, and seized St. Ludmilla's rope. The first stroke rang like bronze amber uncoiling through water. Milada sensed thousands of ears tilt toward it, hearts aligning like compass needles. She counted 8 beats, one for each century since the bell was cast, before sounding the next. Saint Ludmilla answered in a treble voice, then Saint Wenceslas in contemplative baritone. Instead of the usual ladder of notes, she improvised, letting intuition guide her fingers from one rope to the next, sometimes 2 at once, sometimes a pause that allowed the overtones to breed. With every vibration, she felt filaments brushing her skin, gossamer lines of color inhaling and exhaling through her pores. They prickled, burned, then cooled into waves that rolled outward, carrying the story of each beating heart onto the square. She sensed the beekeeper's hope like honeyed gold, the potter's wish a swirl of terracotta, little Jana Huba's dream of studying stars, a bright silver coil. Beneath them pulsed Kirel Meshik's dread, black and sticky, but now Milada recognized its silhouette. Not a demon, only a knot, starved for fingers to untie it. She modulated the bells to a major key, weaving warmth around the knot. She pictured Corel hearing the bells and seeing if the mirrors functioned, how his dread dimmed the rainbow around him. She struck St. Michael last, a mighty clarion whose vibration climbed her spine like lightning and perched behind her eyes, blazing. The entire tower seemed to sway. She tasted metal, salt, and something like cinders. Below, gasps rose, a soft avalanche of awe. The mirrors flared alive, catching strands of blue, crimson, emerald. Even those without the cartographer's gift glimpsed glimmers, soft auroras rippling across the square, lines connecting hand to hand, stall to stall. Children pointed, old women crossed themselves. Milada's knees buckled, but she kept ringing, drawing the tapestry tighter until, in one breathless instant, every thread converged on a single luminous shape, the silhouette of Hradiste itself. Future bride, reclaimed by its people. Then the sequence resolved into silence. The echoes receded like tides. Milada sagged. Elias caught her before she struck the floor. "Easy," he murmured. "You did it." Her ears roared. Did they see? Yes, and more importantly, they felt. The map is inside them now. They descended slowly. In the square, townsfolk milled as if waking from a shared dream. The beekeeper's granddaughter hugged her grandmother, tears on her cheeks. Krehelmeshich moved through the crowd in a daze, stopping to grasp neighbors' shoulders, repeating words Milada couldn't hear but which looked like apologies. Lanterns reflected off slack strings of light still lacing the air, gradually fading like fireflies. Mayor Benishik approached. "What miracle has visited us?" he asked, voice half prayer. Elias smiled. "No miracle, only your own hopes, ringing back to you." In the weeks that followed, change seeded itself quietly. Carell announced a cooperative plan. He would reopen part of the shoe factory as a shared workspace for local artisans, funded by a modest grant the town matched. The beekeeper's granddaughter decided to study apiculture in Brno, promising to return each summer. A committee formed to petition the regional rail authority for better service, led by teenagers. The winter had not melted, yet the atmosphere tasted of thaw. Elias remained long enough to finish his map. He worked in the town hall attic, layering vellum sheets until the tapestry resembled a constellation atlas. On Candlemas Eve, he rolled the parchments, bound them with jute, and presented them to Milada. "For the archive," he said, "so you remember what you made possible." "We," she corrected. He kissed her cheek. "I follow horizons, Milada, but your bells are the horizon here. Guard them." Dawn of his departure, she climbed the tower alone. Thick fog blurred the streets into milk. She located the faint silhouette of Elias crossing the bridge to the station, map case at his back. She raised St. Rizzoli's rope and rang a farewell chime, one soft note that curved through the mist like a promise. The figure paused, turned, and lifted his hat in salute. Then he vanished into whiteness. Milada rang the bells, as always, but she felt their voice differently now, like a choir in conversation. Occasionally, when the town's pulse quickened during a festival, or when the cooperative unveiled its first line of boots, she sensed the filaments trembling at her fingertips, ready to flare again. She did not force them. Visions had their seasons. Once every year, on the eve of the Three Kings, she performed the shared future peal. The strain left her exhausted, but jubilant, unaware of how her face shone while she worked. Children born after the first tapestry grew up believing all towns possessed such nights. Elders clasped hands and called the bells a sacrament. No one forgot the cold night when color bloomed across the square and strangers saw themselves not as scattered souls, but as threads of a single weaving. And though Elias never returned, travelers sometimes arrived, carrying stories of dream cartographers who spoke of a Czech bell ringer whose chimes could summon whole horizons. Milada listened with secret pleasure, then climbed her tower, opened the shutters, and let the wind knit her breath to bronze once more, trusting that wherever Elias wandered, he felt the vibrations too, guiding his own footsteps toward futures yet uncharted.